Let's start talking about the breakdown of the medical aid. Now, the first thing of a medical aid that you need to understand is, and this is the core of the whole medical aid, this is the heartbeat of the medical aid, and that is the major medical expenses. The major medical expenses cover is the portion that covers you for in-hospital expenses. That is, you get into an accident, you have to go to a hospital, you have to have an operation. All of those things are covered through the major medical expenses portion of your medical aid. This portion is run through a pooled risk model. What does a pooled risk model mean? It means that everybody's contributions, all these millions of people that are contributing to that specific medical aid, all those contributions goes into one big pool or one big bucket, and then they pay all the people's claims out of that bucket. So you might this year contribute 20,000 Rand into that pool and have no hospitalization, so you're paying for somebody else to be able to be hospitalized, because somebody else might pay 20,000 but have 100,000 Rands worth of expenses this month. So that pooled risk is then managed and everybody claims from the pool. People don't like it when I say it, but medical aids, as with insurance at any point, is basically a pyramid scheme. Is everybody contributes, and the few people that need to benefit from it benefit, the rest of the people just pay for it. But it is what it is. It is the structure that we need to make sure that we have that security. In your major medical expenses, you could get a medical aid with public hospitalization cover, which no one goes for because we know what the public health system in South Africa looks like. And then you have private hospital cover. So obviously you don't want to go for a medical aid that gives you public hospital cover. You want private hospital cover. But once you have the private hospital cover medical aid, different plans give you different rates of cover. So with a medical aid, 100% cover doesn't really mean 100% cover. So I see a lot of ads on social media, people saying, get cheap medical aid, 100% covered. 100% doesn't mean 100%. It means 100% of the medical aid rates. So that every medical aid has their own rate book of what they are willing to pay for specific conditions. So it is 100% of that medical aid rates. So 100% cover in medical aid terms doesn't really mean 100% cover. So you can then choose with your medical aid whether you want a plan with 100% cover, a plan with 150% cover, or a plan with 200% cover. There are still some with 300% cover. Why do you need more cover than the medical aid rate? It's not necessarily for the hospital. It is for the specialists, the surgeons, the anaesthetists, because they can charge up to 500% and more than the medical aid rate for their services. So if the medical aid rate of medical aid only pays 100% of the anaesthetist, which is say 3,000 Rand for the condition that you went in for, or the procedure that you had to go for, the anaesthetist can maybe charge 9,000 Rand, and the difference will be for your account. So that is important to understand. Just another thing on that, if you are booked in for an operation and you go in, you are allowed up front to first find out what the cost is for the anaesthetist. You are allowed to ask them for a quote. And if they are not within reason, you are allowed to ask for a different anaesthetist, for example. I see so many people, they don't even ask questions. They just go in, the anaesthetist pitches up, says sign here, they just sign, and then 2 months later or a month later they get a bill for 15,000 Rand, and then they don't know why it was so expensive, and then they blame the medical aid. They say, yeah, I've got a crappy medical aid because they haven't even paid for the anaesthetist. You must also take some responsibility. So ask the questions. There's nothing wrong in telling the anaesthetist, tell me what you're going to charge me before you actually go in for the operation. Okay, so you then have that different rates, and obviously if you have a medical aid plan with 150% instead of 100%, it's going to be more expensive on a monthly basis. The next thing you can choose on your major medical expenses is whether you want to be linked to a network of hospitals or where you want to be able to go to any private hospital. So how does that work? So most of the medical aids have an agreement with one of the private hospital networks, whether it is Netcare, when it is Life Hospitals, they have an agreement. And that agreement says that on that plan, they won't charge the medical aid more for your stay in hospital than what the medical aid is willing to pay. So there will never be a shortfall. Because of that, your premium will be a little bit less than what any hospital cover will be. So if you then are on a network of hospital cover, you have to go into one of the network hospitals if you have to go in for an operation. If you do not go to one of these hospitals, there will be a co-payment payable, usually a percentage of the total bill. So be very careful of that. But typically, if there is a network hospital close by to you, most of your hospitalization will happen in that network hospital. So I don't have an issue with being on an associated or on a network hospital plan. It costs you less per month and you still get the same cover because you would probably have gone to that hospital in any case. But what happens if you are in Gatsrand somewhere and you get into an accident and you now have to go to a hospital and there's no network hospital close by? A lot of people are afraid of that. So in the event of an emergency, they will take you to the closest private hospital they can find. Whether it is a network hospital or not, they don't mind. They take you to the closest private hospital, and once you are stabilized, they will only then move you to a network hospital. So you don't have to be afraid that in the event of an emergency, you'll end up in a public hospital, or you'll end up not being able to be admitted to hospital. That is built in. So network hospitals, I'm a very big, I really suggest to people to look at the network option because it works out much cheaper every month. Also, your chronic medication, most of the medical aids from your pooled risk, they will pay your chronic medication. And there you also have choices, whether you want your chronic medication paid at any pharmacy, at specific network pharmacies, or at a public institution like a clinic. Now, again, if you choose any, your premium will be higher than if you choose network, which will then be higher than if you choose public. So if you have no chronic medication, don't choose any provider for chronic. Why do you want to pay 400-500 Rand a month more for something that you're not going to use in the first place? So if you then have to, let's say you have chronic medication, but your chronic medication is only 100 Rand a month because it's a little blood pressure medication or something, then it's also pointless to go to any chronic provider that's going to cost you 400 Rand per month, but your chronic medication only costs you 100 Rand a month. Then I'd rather pay for that chronic out of my own pocket. So think of these kind of things, because again, medical aid is what we call what-if money. It is money that you pay a third party for in case something happens. Doesn't create a cash value, doesn't come back to you unless one of those things happen. So you want to pay for what you actually need. Don't just get a broker that sits with you and wants to sell you the comprehensive plan by scaring you and making sure you have to have the best possible medical aid. There are things at different periods of your life that are more important. So if you are young, you probably don't need chronic as much as somebody in their 40s and 50s. And every year at around December, you will be able to upgrade or downgrade your plan accordingly. So if you get into August of the year, you get prescribed chronic medication, and for 2 or 3 months you have to pay it out of your pocket and then go up a plan from January, you can do that and they cannot decline you. They have to allow you to upgrade.